Dr. Greer from the United States. And I'm truly, truly pleased to have Dr. Greer with us here today. For those of our listeners who don't know who Dr. Greer is, Dr. Greer is truly the world's foremost authority on extraterrestrial activities. He founded the Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and he also created the Disclosure Project. Dr. Greer, I'm so pleased to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be with you.
Thank you so much. Basically, what our listeners are probably going to be interested in, how did you get started? What were your beginnings in this world of extraterrestrials and finding out about these activities that are happening every day here on this planet? How did it all start for you? Can you say a few things about that?
Well, it actually started when I was a child, and I guess I was maybe 8 or 9, and I had a sighting of a daytime object that was fully materialized where I grew up in North Carolina, in Charlotte. And it was amazing because it was very close, silent disc, no scenes, no parts, and some other boys in the neighborhood saw it with me. So it ignited this lifelong interest, and I was just basically as a child fascinated and obsessed with the subject, and began to collect everything I could reading about it when I was, until maybe I was 12, and then I sort of forgot about it, and then my interest got reignited a few years later. I'm an emergency doctor, and my training is in medicine, and my specialty is trauma and emergency. And back when I was 17, before I was a doctor, I had a near-death experience. I got very sick, and I had an out-of-body, for lack of a better word, experience. And even though I was raised to not believe in such things, it was an amazing experience. And in that experience, I discovered what consciousness is and what higher states of consciousness are and how they operate. And I began a process of doing meditation and exploring the boundaries of cosmic awareness. And in the process of doing that, discovered a technique for making contact with these interstellar civilizations, which I began to experiment with when I was only 18 years of age, about 6 months after the near-death experience. And so I was up in the mountains of North Carolina one evening, and I was meditating, and I was in a very deep state of cosmic awareness, a samadhi state, and I realized that I wasn't alone. And when I opened my eyes, there was a craft and some ET beings that were right beside me. And it was just this amazing experience. And basically, I realized that civilizations that go faster than the speed of light, their whole paradigm is that of a conscious cosmos and a conscious universe. Although as a boy, when I was 18, I didn't really understand how to articulate this. The experience of it was very strong. And so this goes back even before my medical career, of course, and I didn't know what in the world to do with this information because I started practicing a technique which I now call the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, or CE5 technique, where we use remote viewing using consciousness to see remote places in space and to make contact. And I sort of invented this or created it with these extraterrestrial civilizations back when I was a 18-year-old young man. And every time I would do it, there would be some phenomenon, some sort of extraterrestrial phenomenon happen in the area. So I realized that, somehow I'd stumbled across the Rosetta Stone of contact and how contact is made. And I didn't do much with it, except maybe every couple of years I would practice it, and there would be some beautiful contact experience. In fact, one of my favorite was in France. And when I was 20 years old, I was in Isola, up in the Maritime Alps, above Nice, up in the Alps, maybe at about 6,000 or 7,000 feet up. And I was on a meditation course to become a teacher of meditation, and I was practicing this technique that I had sort of stumbled upon or created in 2 years earlier. And I was with some friends, and in broad daylight, a massive tetrahedron, it was a big craft that was shaped like a tetrahedron, appeared in the mountains where we were walking. And, of course, everyone with me was astonished, and a couple of my friends knew that I had discovered how to do this. And they said, "Oh, my God, have you been doing this today?" I said, "Yes, this morning I went into deep meditation and asked them to visit here." So that was in Isola, France in 1975, and dating myself. By the way, I just had my 60th birthday, so I've been doing this since I was 18.
Happy birthday, Dr. Greer. Happy birthday.
Yeah. So it's, hilarious. Sort of the whole story is it sort of unfolded. And, after a few years, I didn't know what I was going to do with this. I mean, what do you do with this sort of information? There was no context. So, I got married and had children. And then in 1990, I had a contact experience again that said that I should form an organization to be a diplomatic front to these civilizations. That was a pioneering effort. So 25 years ago, we're having our 25th anniversary this year. In fact, next month, of founding the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And so I started forming these groups to go out and practice this. And when we did so, a couple of years later, we were in Florida, and everyone who's seen the film Sirius has seen this event. The film Sirius is a documentary that you can see at our website at SiriusDisclosure.com. It's SIRIUS disclosure.com. And it was this amazing event where I was just training people on a weekend, and 4 of these ET craft just popped into the sky right above us. And the film is not very good because back then we did not have good night cameras or very good technology, but there were a couple of Air Force guys there who were pilots, and the word of this got out and made its way up through the chain of command, up to the Army intelligence and CIA in America. And basically they said, "What the hell are you doing?" And so began the transition from CSETI to the Disclosure Project. So beginning in 1992-93, I started a worldwide project to brief world leaders on this subject to try to end the secrecy behind it. And, at that time, I'm not sure I understood all the implications of why this was secret. But as I began to dig into the subject, it had nothing to do with extraterrestrials. It had to do with the technology behind how they're traveling, that if those technologies got disclosed, it would terminate the oil industry, the petrodollar, gas, coal, public utilities, jet engines, internal combustion engines. All of it would be obsolete within a matter of months, literally. So that began a period where when President Clinton was the president, with his wife Hillary was the first lady, we had meetings that were set up that Lawrence Rockefeller, who was the old scion of the Rockefeller family, said, "Look, we really need to, I really support what you're doing. We need to end the secrecy on this, and we need to do it soon." So we began to do briefings for people like the president, and I was the man who, which was a traumatic experience for me, actually, to provide the first briefings to President Clinton and his CIA director. The first head of the CIA for President Clinton was a man that asked me to come to Washington. And, you have to understand, I'm a young doctor with, in my 30s with a family and 4 children, being asked to come up to Washington to brief the CIA director.
Why was it traumatic?
Almost unimaginable. It was traumatic because what I realized is that the secrecy in most countries, including France, by the way, is so severely curtailed and so compartmentalized that people like the president and the CIA director were being lied to about these projects and about this information. So they asked me to come up to sort of put together the best evidence we could and present it to the president. So that began what was the early days of the Disclosure Project. So we went from doing a project for interplanetary contact and peace and sort of creating sort of citizen ambassadors to these civilizations to very quickly realizing that there was a vacuum of information, not only in the public, but even in the highest reaches of what we would think would be powerful people in Washington and in Paris and London and elsewhere. So this began a period between 1993 and 2001 where we provided these sort of briefings for folks all over the world who were very powerful people, but who were in most cases, being lied to about the subject. And the reason for the deception and the secrecy wasn't anything frightening about the extraterrestrials. Everyone knows that they are not actually at all hostile. If they were, we would be done. It would be over. It was because the technology behind their propulsion and energy systems were so advanced that if the public knew about them, they wouldn't want to be spending money on petrol. And that this is really a big macroeconomic, geopolitical issue that has gotten handled in a way that President Eisenhower warned us about when he said, beware the military-industrial complex. And so in about a 2-year period, I went from doing this just as a citizen who was interested in the aspects of consciousness and making contact to being thrown into the belly of the beast, as it were, doing briefings for people like the CIA director and the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States and the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. So it was a very, very strange sort of turn in my career. Now, I continued to work all through this period as a emergency doctor, but at a certain point, I left medicine to do this full time because the consequences are so great that you can't do everything, and so I had to make a choice. And so now I'm focused purely on creating interstellar relations and peaceful contact, and also disclosing this information and with it the technologies that would give us a civilization without any pollution or poverty. I mean, it sounds utopian, but it could be done in probably less than 15 years, that the whole planet could be transformed this way.
How do they travel?
Well, of course, I mean, these civilizations are, first of all, my first thing I always say to people, a little bit of humility goes a long way, which is something Stephen Hawking needs to learn. You're not going to understand how, let's say if someone from Thomas Jefferson's era or Napoleon's era were to see a smartphone, an iPhone, or a satellite transmission, it would all look like, or a hologram, this would all look like something metaphysical. It would look like some kind of a magic to them. And so now let's think, that's only been a couple of 100 years, Earth years. Now let's go back and stop for a moment and think that there are civilizations out there, and they estimate just in our own galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy that our sun and solar system is part of, there are at least 11 billion Earth-like planets. So let's think for a moment that in a universe that's 14 billion years old, it's extremely likely there are civilizations that have been around for hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of years longer than us with technology. So let's extrapolate into the future. Let's look and see, okay, our technology, 100 and some 50 years ago, we were horses and buggies, and we didn't even have electricity, and we didn't even have telephones. Now, in 150 years later, 200 years later, we have all that we have today. Now let's extrapolate into the future at that level of technological progression, what civilizations' technologies might look like that are several 100,000 to several million years more developed than ours.
Unimaginable.
In other words, almost every aspect of how they would appear would look like magic to us, just like a hologram or a cell phone would look like magic to Thomas Jefferson or to someone of that era 200 years ago. And I think this is why it's so hard for conventional scientists to begin to understand what the phenomenon is, because it's a phenomenon that involves consciousness, electromagnetic systems that go faster than the speed of light. These are called transdimensional scalar electromagnetic systems. And the physics behind it, by the way, has been figured out. It was figured out in the 1940s and 50s. One of the men that I've worked with for many years was the highest-ranking scientist at the Naval Research Lab, which is the biggest Department of Defense labs in the United States. And he was third in command there from an administrative point of view, but the highest-ranking scientist. He had been in a covert program where he saw the documents that we mastered gravity control, in other words, anti-gravity, in our classified program in 1954, October of 1954.
Wow.
So what this means is there has been a parallel technological development program going on for about 70 years, since World War II, where most of this has been kept incredibly secret. There have been a few spin-offs. The spin-offs would be things like the Internet, fiber optics, integrated circuits, transistors, things of this sort. But the basic energy and the physics behind the energy generation and propulsion systems have all been kept very, very secret in the United States, but also in France and the United Kingdom and Russia and other countries. And the reason for this is that they understand that if this information came out, it would completely change the centralized macroeconomic power that is currently running the world. I may say running the world into the ground and ruining the world, but it's also something where people who have that kind of power do not want to see that kind of change happen.
It would shake the governments
so the
and
way
the
that
religions.
these civilizations are going from one star system to another is that they literally create a resonant field around, say, the spacecraft and everyone in it, that is a very high voltage at a certain resonant frequency, and the craft shifts from this dimension into another dimension. In other words, people say, oh, is it going through a black hole? I go, no, it doesn't need to, but in a sense it's creating its own black hole. It's creating an energy field around the object where it literally can go beyond the speed of light and go into another dimension. So it's a trans-dimensional transportation system. And by the way, the science behind this has been known in a lot of circles for many, many years. It sounds fantastic to most people, but they're not using rockets and they're not using fossil fuels and things of this sort. It's all very high-tech electromagnetic systems that allow for the spacecraft and everyone on board it to literally drop out of linear space-time and go into these other dimensions, which are, by the way, increasingly etheric and almost like an astral type energy field. And then they're moving from point A to B, not at the speed of light, but at the speed of, firstly, at the speed of thought, at the speed of the physics all changes when you're in these other dimensions. So that's how they're actually getting here from other star systems.
I think it was Ben Rich of Skunkworks, Lockheed Skunkworks, who said we have the technology to take ET home, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was the Lockheed Skunk Works who built the U-2 spy plane. Everybody knows about U-2. Well, they know about the rock group, but they also need to, they built the U-2. But Lockheed Skunk Works and also Northrop Grumman. My uncle was the aerospace guy at Northrop Grumman that worked on the the thing that put the first man on the moon, the lunar module. And so my family was tied into some of these, and I got to know a lot of people at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And Ben Rich said, yes, we already have the means to take ET home, and that implies faster than the speed of light, teleportation and travel through these other dimensions, because you cannot do it if it's less than the speed of light, because, if a star system is 1,000 light years from here, which is not very far, that's just 1% of the way through the Milky Way galaxy. Even at the speed of light, it would take 1,000 years to get there and 1,000 years to get back. So you have to begin to think in these non-local physics. The physics of non-locality is what it's called. And I know this gets into a lot of esoteric physics, which may be beyond what your show wants to do. But it really is this whole new area of physics that unfortunately has been held back from the public knowledge. So if you go to MIT or to the Sorbonne, you're not going to find people who have a good understanding of this type of physics. The physics they're learning is kindergarten. And this level of physics has been classified. So it exists in the aerospace community at Lockheed. It exists within certain compartmented operations within the CIA and DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, and other corporations such as Science Applications International Corporation, Northrop Grumman, and MITRE Corporation, Booz Allen Hamilton, for example, that Snowden worked for. But there are a lot of corporate contractors where they have scientists who understand this, but it's been incredibly classified. If you think about the fact that in the 1990s, President Clinton wanted to find out about this, just like Jimmy Carter did, and was being denied access. And I end up being the man that's brought up from my medical career to do a briefing. This is how broken our system is. It's incredibly dysfunctional. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it's been so compartmentalized and highly secretive that most people who we think are at the pinnacle of power in the world really are not. And the people who have this understanding want to keep it very, very quiet.
The people that are in power are a completely different set of people than we imagine them to be.
Yeah, it's and really, it's always been like that. It's the power behind the throne, as it were. And we're dealing with a very dysfunctional geopolitical system for that reason. I mean, I recently was at a meeting 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, with 120 world leaders, where I was asked to present this information because most of these people had no knowledge of it. And they were, ministers of defense and people like that. And what was so interesting about this meeting is that there was a sort of a new openness to wanting to explore what really might exist within the deep national security state, not just in the United States, but throughout the industrialized world. Because the group that's been working on this is not just American, it's transnational. It has representation in Europe, it has representation in China, in Russia, and it really doesn't care about these geopolitical borders and conventional politics. It really is more concerned about these larger macroeconomic geopolitical issues and being able to control the technology so it doesn't disrupt. Now, I have used the term transform, but if you own $1 trillion oil field, or you own the infrastructure for the nuclear power plants that France has 70% of its electricity from, what you begin to realize is that all of that is so obsolete. I mean, let's face it, a nuclear power plant is technology from the 40s and 50s, and oil and gas and coal is from the 1800s. So everything we're using to run our planet is at least 70 to 100 years old. And everything that's been developed since then, and has been discovered since then, by the way, has been ruthlessly suppressed and kept secret. And this is killing our planet. I mean, from just the point of view of looking at what's happening to the environment, to the situation in the Middle East, the secrecy is exactly the threat that President Eisenhower said it would be. He warned that this excessive illegal secrecy would be a threat to our way of life and to our security. And that was when he left office in 1961. And the first CIA director, Roscoe Hillenkoetter, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, wrote a letter, which I have, that was also from that same period of the late 50s, early 60s, where he said that the UFOs were real, that we were being visited, but that the matter is being handled in a way that is a threat to our society. He didn't say the UFOs were a threat. He said the secrecy is a threat to our society and our survival. So, I was barely alive when these giants of the post-World War II era, like the first CIA director, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, and Eisenhower, and these other people were warning us of this. But, no one knew what to do about this. And so I came along sort of a little bit late in the game in the 90s and 2000s saying, well, maybe we need to do two things.
Just in time,
Three things. First, make contact with these civilizations as civilians that are peaceful. Second, disclose this information and the energy technology so we could transform the environment and eliminate poverty in the world and create a just civilization. And then, thirdly, get these, through the disclosure, get these illegal projects under control. Because if they are not brought under control, then they're going to be an increasing existential threat to the survival of our civilization. This is really getting into genuine existential threats because of how they've been behaving. And I think this is something that has to be dealt with, and it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of courage because, as you know, I had a former CIA director who was helping me that they assassinated. They found him floating down the Potomac River because he was defecting from this secret group that he had gotten involved with.
Who was
and
that?
His name was Bill Colby.
Bill Colby.
And everyone thought that it was very strange the way he died. And it turns out the day that he died, or the week that he died, he was going to meet with my board of directors to hand off one of these free energy devices that would pulls energy out of the zero-point energy field, it's called, and around $50 million in funding so we could get it developed and get it out to the public as a source of free energy for the planet. That very week, he was found floating down the Potomac River and was killed. And this was a man who had retired from being the CIA director and had gotten involved in these covert groups and was really disgusted by the secrecy. And he ended up being killed because of his actions on behalf of the planet. He was a real hero. But what I ended up doing is saying, okay, well, let's find people who maybe aren't going to do something quite that bold, but we can start bringing the information out. So we started the Disclosure Project, and in 2001, we had the National Press Club event that was seen eventually by over 800 million people around the world, where we had dozens of military and top-secret people talking about their experiences with the UFOs. And providing the evidence. So, by the way, all of this is at our website. If people are astonished as they hear this, we have like 65 of these military witnesses on videotape. Their summary is on SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com. And the photos and the documents and the radar cases and all kinds of information. So the website literally, if you keep clicking around, has thousands of pages and links in it. And this is out there for anyone who wants to read it and look at it and see. But ultimately, we realized that since the people at the Elysee Palace and the people at the White House didn't want to take this on, we, the people, should take it on. And so that began. I started the Global Disclosure Project Network back at that time. But initially, my goal was, to be honest with you, I thought, perhaps I was naive, that if we put together the evidence, our leaders, the political leaders, would do the right thing and take this forward. But they didn't. They were too afraid to take on this cabal of petro-Nazis and vicious people because, frankly, I think they were afraid of being assassinated. So
that seems
ultimately,
to be the case.
this fell on our. We decided we better do it because we're running out of time. Our civilization needs to bring this information out quickly.
I'm constantly surprised that at the courage that you yourself display in face of the great powers that you're going up against. I have to say that I'm truly amazed.
Well, that is an effect. When I first, in 1992, the head of Army Intelligence personally threatened me.
Oh, really?
And I just told him to go bug off. And I think because I had had a near-death experience and I'm not afraid of death, I just told him, I said, look, you're not going to be able to intimidate me. And, I'm not rich, but I'm well off enough as a doctor. I don't need to be your money, and I don't need anything you have. And he was really angry because he knew that there was no way he could bribe me or or threaten me that would cause me to stop. Now, we had a lot of problems on my team. We had more than one person who was killed.
I was going to ask you about that. Can you say a few things about that? I mean, I understand that some mysterious, very fast-growing cancers happened to some of your close people and friends. So very mysterious. Can you say a few things about that?
Very, very strange. 3 people died within a few months around the time Bill Colby, the CI director, was killed. Now, we haven't had those problems recently because I have had people come to me offering protection. And I said, yes, I'll do it. In fact, you'd be very surprised. There's some incredibly supportive people who are in the CIA, who are in French intelligence also, and Air Force, and who are in other places who have said this is ridiculous, and we're not going to let this happen to your people again.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's a bit of what we say in America, a Mexican standoff. But ultimately, I think that, nobody knows how this is going to play out, except that, there are civilizations out there waiting for us to become peaceful and to join sort of an interplanetary family. They've been waiting for a long time. It's gotten thwarted because of 2 agendas. One is the secrecy around the macroeconomic power. The other is more of a philosophical problem, and it's what I call this sort of eschatological nexus, this end-of-the-world obsession that people have, that somehow we have to have some big final battle in space, some kind of stupid science fiction idea. And, General Douglas MacArthur in 1950s, in his last speech to Congress, said World War III will be interplanetary. So what they have been planning since the 50s is to hoax all kinds of threats from outer space so that the world, like 9/11, would be stampeded into some kind of a panic, except instead of it being, an Islamic threat or a threat of terrorists, it would be a threat that would be extraterrestrial, which is totally a hoax. I mean, it's a complete falsehood. But this is what they've been working on since the 50s. And I think that part of the big problem with this subject is that it's not one agenda that's running that's maintaining the secrecy. There are a whole bunch of agendas, but it has to do with the future planet Earth. Where is it going to go? And I would say that we need to leave that kind of nonsense behind and start a new civilization based on universality of consciousness, universal peace, very advanced technology, and go out into space in that consciousness. There are other people who want to see endless war go on forever because it benefits the military-industrial complex. And so about 99% of all the information out there on the Internet and in movies on the UFO and ET subject is tailor-made by the intelligence community to scare people. And the reason they want people to be afraid is that if people are afraid, they'll hate. And if they'll hate, they'll engage in war. And this is exactly what Adolf Hitler did when he demonized Jewish people and gay people and all kinds of people. So the same thing is being done by the intelligence community and their minions in the UFO subculture to demonize extraterrestrials, when obviously if you're a thinking person, if a civilization has the ability to go beyond the speed of light, to materialize and dematerialize at will, to go across galactic distances, not just interstellar distances, there's nothing on this planet they need from us.
Right.
Their only concern would be the further development of consciousness and life throughout the universe. So that's the kind of civilizations we're dealing with here. But if you look at all the science fiction movies and you look at all the books and videotapes on this subject, it's filled with all kinds of frightening images and ideas. That's all been done deliberately. It's been deliberately to brainwash propaganda to make people afraid. And I always tell people, you can't, it's very easy to do this when you have the kind of resources this covert intelligence program has. So we estimate in the United States between 100 and 200 billion dollars every year is being stolen and put into these illegal, unacknowledged secret projects. And that's a conservative number, by the way. I mean, the U.S. budget right now is right at $4 trillion. That's the U.S. government's expenditures, $4 trillion U.S. dollars per year. So to make 5% of that, or 200 billion, just disappear into covert programs is very easily done. And that's what's going on. So there's a corruption that is very deep in the system that needs to be excised. It's like a cancer that's grown that needs to be corrected. And this is one of the reasons why the Disclosure Project, has continued to expose these kinds of things. And but my heart, what I love the most is actually going out under the stars with people and teaching them about higher states of consciousness and how to make contact and become ambassadors. And if you go to our website, we have actually an app that is a training app to train people in the whole meditation and everything.
I have that app on my phone, I have to tell you. I have it. Dr. Greer, since we're in France, can you say a few things, give us an update on the disclosure process as it might be happening in France? And I understand also you spent some time on a French estate with some very important people, I don't know, some years ago, and that you also were approached by the French government concerning the disclosure. Can you say a few things about that?
Yes, and actually, I'm going to be doing a presentation in London that will be on Thursday, Thursday, the 17th of September, and also in Lisbon on the 3rd of September, where I'm going to be discussing a lot of this. And people can find out about that at our website, and there's a free email newsletter where people can sign up and get it. Because I think it's important for people in Europe to understand that there is a parallel process on a smaller level that has happened in Europe, that's happened in the United States, where there are people who are friendly to disclosure, but there are also covert programs that kind of subvert and keep the whole system secret, the whole information secret. So some years ago, I was approached by some people who are French intelligence and Air Force people, and your Ministry of Defense on this subject, and to come to teach them the techniques for the CE5 contact protocols. And this included an admiral who was a PhD and also an MD, such as myself, and who was a senior person who would be briefing like your president. I think back at that time it was a man named Sarkozy was the president. I think he's still involved in politics there. And so the Ministry of Defense was very, very interested in making peaceful contact and going into the future in a peaceful way with this. And this is the French Ministry of Defense. It is the most wonderful set of documents and letters I've ever received from a government, and most enlightened, I have to say. Very enlightened. Now, so what we subsequently did, there was a man involved with this whose family were involved with the founding of the French Republic. In fact, his family was involved with the beheading of Marie Antoinette, who was very interesting, way back. But they had this huge estate in Brittany.
Is there a name?
Yeah, and so they asked me to come to Brittany and to do a CE5 on this 2,200-acre estate. And there were people in the public there. It was a weekend retreat. But there were a number of people from the Ministry of Defense there also, including the Admiral. And while we were doing this, they set up a radar perimeter around, and they were able to clock ET craft moving over our site at 200,000 kilometers an hour, and all kinds of other phenomena that was in the field with us, including a fantastic photograph we got of a partially materialized almost like purple mauve-colored craft hovering in the field right before we were going to begin one of our meditations. So this sort of event was sort of a demonstration project for people at the Ministry of Defense. But I think there were also a series of briefings that happened with some of their intelligence officials and Air Force officials who came actually to Washington and then out to my farm in Virginia, because what they didn't understand, these were people who were friendly to this, and what they couldn't understand is how deep, how very deep the secret national security state is, and that it transcends both American and U.S. political structures. And so I had my military advisor and my scientific team, as well as this senior official at the Naval Research Labs, meet with the French officials to describe to them how the system actually works. Because when I first described it to the French officials, they said, "This is terrible and fantastic and unbelievable." I said, "Well, you need to come to Washington and let me introduce you to some people so that you understand, really how this is working." And so this was done just a few years ago. And so, that continued, that kind of process continues to take place. A part of it is an educational process, because you have people who are in the military or French intelligence, or you have them at the Ministry of Defense and in the UK and MI5 and MI6. And they won't know that there are things going on underneath them that are deeper and that they're never told about, just like in the United States. For example, I've briefed the man who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is like almost as big as the CIA, but it's inside the Pentagon. It's the intelligence operation inside the Pentagon. And this general, who was a 3-star general, had made inquiries into this information and had basically been lied to, and he knew he had been lied to, just like the CIA director had. And I briefed the man who was the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what we call J2, so the man in charge of intelligence assessments for the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States. This man, who was an admiral, had made inquiries, and I gave him a document that actually had the code numbers and project names current as of the 1990s on this. And basically, he was told when he contacted one of them that he didn't have a need to know. And he says, "Well, damn it, I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. How can I not have a need to know?" And they just hung up on him. They said, we're not going to discuss this with you, and they hung up on this admiral. So the secrecy is not only illegal, but it is very, very deep. Now, that's true also in Great Britain. It is true in France. It is true in Germany. It's true in Russia. It's true in China. So everyone thinks that, there's this sort of perfect chain of command that's operational, and it does on certain things, like, a conventional military operation. But on this subject, it's a parallel universe. It's a total parallel universe. And that was one of the things that we were trying to explain to these French officials, because it was just seemed unimaginable to them that the President of the United States or the man who would be head of the Defense Intelligence Agency or CIA could be deceived and lied to about projects going on right underneath their nose. But they had to not only hear it from me, they had to hear it from these other men who had been part of this process and been in these programs.
That should be amazing indeed.
Well, it was. That's why they used the word, this is terrible and fantastic.
Yes.
And this is where it really is like Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. But, ultimately it makes sense, because if you look at the Canadian document from 1951, the Wilbur Smith document, which was a top-secret document where this man had been asked by the Canadians to find out what the Americans were doing with the UFOs, and he wrote this assessment that we have. I mean, this has been a published document. It's a top-secret document that got declassified accidentally in Canada. It's a Canadian document, and it says, number one, that the UFOs are real, they're interplanetary. It says, number two, that there's a group headed up by Dr. Vannevar Bush and others. So he headed up the Manhattan Project for the atomic bomb in the 40s, that are studying the modus operandi, the mechanism of action of the UFOs and what their energy and propulsion systems are, and that all of this was more top secret than the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now, this was in 1951, the year before we detonated the first H-bomb, or thermonuclear device at the Bikini Atoll. So this is an undisputed top-secret government document. And so I tell people, I said, if you understand the implications of that document, what it means is that the level of secrecy was so great that it exceeded the development of the ultimate doomsday weapon, which was the hydrogen bomb in the 50s. So I think people have to understand that we're not dealing with a conventional issue here at all. And the power that is attached to this information is enormous. Because let's visualize our planet. Right now we have 7.2 billion people living in a 1880s paradigm of fossil fuel, with cars and railroads and diesel engines and trucks, and jets even were developed in the 1930s, by the way. So this is all very primitive, and it's very polluting, and it's very damaging to the environment and to people's health. Imagine if these technologies came out where everyone had free energy. We didn't need highways because we were floating above the ground, like the Jetsons, like the cartoons, in these anti-gravity devices. The planet would be completely transformed macroeconomically and environmentally. But the people, the top couple hundred corporations and individuals that have most of the world's wealth under their control, that would all dissipate because power would go back to the people. You would have manufacturing at the local level. You'd have transportation, energy generation. There would not be this long supply chain of fossil fuels and coal and oil and natural gas. All that would be over. Gazprom in Russia, out of business. So you're talking about something that has such a huge implication for the powers that really run the world. And those are not the political powers. The political power, the people we elect, are really doing the bidding of the big bankers and the big oil companies and the big corporations. I mean, in America, everyone knows it's such a corrupt system that none of these people can make it through all the way up to the White House or to become a senator without basically being owned by these special interests. And that's true also in France and in Russia and in Great Britain and China, everywhere else. So this is the problem. It's corruption, but on a scale that is breathtaking to most people. And that's why I think this has got to be a people's initiative. I've said the future of disclosure, I'm doing two things. One is I'm continuing to brief world leaders and encouraging them to get educated on this and come together and make a change. The other is trying to get the people to understand that if they get educated on this and demand change, then it will happen, because no political leader is going to stick their neck out on this without the cover of having the populace behind them, the masses. So it has got to be a mass movement, not only for disclosure and bringing out these technologies, but also for this effort to make contact peacefully. And I think this is why it's not either or, but I think the real thrust has to be with the people doing this and taking the initiative, which is why we call it the CE5 initiative, an initiative taken by the people to be citizen and diplomats. The Disclosure Project, I spent from 1992 and 3 until 2000 offering this to world leaders for them to do it and provide the leadership, and they were too afraid to do it. So now it's up to us to do it. Same thing with the technologies. The technologies exist. It can be proven they exist. We have a whole section of our website on the energy research that we have and what we're trying to do. That has to be done by the people. I think it's very unlikely that any powerful corporation or government is going to bring out these new technologies, because I think they're too afraid to do it, and they're also beholden to these special interests.
CE5 is Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the close description of that?
I'm sorry?
CE5 is Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, right? Can you explain a few more words on that term?
Yeah, well, that was a term that I sort of created in 1990 to describe when humans go out and deliberately make contact. In other words, most of the classifications of contact have been passive. You know, you see an object or something has landed or someone sees an extraterrestrial life form accidentally. But I'm turning this around to where humans empower themselves to reach out and actually make the contact happen. And it involves using lasers, electromagnetic signals, and consciousness. Now, the most controversial part of this, of course, is the consciousness part of it, but it's also the central operating system. Just like your computer has an operating system, the central operating system of the universe is consciousness, awareness. And when you begin to look at it, you understand that interstellar civilizations, if they want to communicate, they have electronic devices that interface and project thought, not electromagnetic signals at the speed of light. Why? Because electromagnetic signals, like your cell phone, and these signals you and I are speaking on right now, are traveling at the speed of light. It's too slow to go interstellar and to be useful. So all their technologies interface with sort of in a field of energy that has to do with where thought and electromagnetism comes together. And that's what we teach people to do, is to go into these states of consciousness where you can experience the mind in its unbounded component, see where these spacecraft are, and then connect to them with coherent thought and show them where you are. So if you see a spacecraft out by Saturn, I'm giving an example because there is a very large center out near Saturn.
Yes.
You connect to them and show them where you are in a field outside of Paris. And you show them very visually, and it's a very coherent, clear, like a laser light, a laser beam of thought. So this is a technique that we use along with the use of lasers and electromagnetic pulse signals that we send out over radio waves to give them a more linear, exact location. And it's all part of a training program. And, I'm actually going to be in Portugal doing a CE5 training for about 30 people in September, but unfortunately that's full already. But we do these throughout the world periodically, but most people can do it just on their own if they get the equipment and either the app, or they can order from our website a whole training program. It's interesting, we also have an app that's a free app that you can get where you can connect to other people in your area who want to do this and practice it together. And that's called the ET Contact Network app. It's etcontactnetwork.com. And that app just allows you to have on your smartphone, and it'll show you where there are people near you so that you can connect to them to do this sort of contact work on your own. But the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative is really about empowering people to be ambassadors from Earth to these civilizations, just completely bypassing the government. Because the governments, like the French government starting this initiative is very encouraging. There's another government that I'm working with that I can't speak about, where their prime minister and minister of defense are looking into this. So, which is very exciting. But I think ultimately it needs to be something that isn't dominated by bureaucracy, but is more a person-to-person event with the public. And once there's a critical mass of people doing this, it's like the sort of 100th monkey effect, or this sort of phase transition effect in physics, where when a certain number of people become coherent and begin to do the same thing, it causes a shift in consciousness
that
potentiates open contact. But I think it's very important for people to view themselves as the prime movers and not look to these authority figures to be the leaders. The leaders, I think, is the man in the street and the man and the woman in the street who can understand this and take it upon themselves to do it. I really honestly believe that's where the big change is going to happen. And so the CE5 initiative is about empowering people to make contact with these civilizations. But to do so, you kind of have to understand what's the language, what's the means, and the language is honestly understanding your own self, understanding the conscious mind within yourself. Because if you understand that the consciousness that allows you to be awake hearing my voice right now, that there is your individuality, but the consciousness is actually, if you strip away all phenomenon, is an unbounded field of pure consciousness. And that level of deep transcendent consciousness, if you meditate and learn how to access that, you can travel and see any place in the cosmos instantly. And this is something that has been proven to be the case, that the nature of the conscious mind is that it is omnipresent. It's non-local. So if you understand this and begin to study it and practice it, it becomes very natural that you could then make contact with these civilizations whose operating system is based in consciousness. All their communication systems, even their paradigm of understanding how the universe is structured, is based on the understanding of increasing levels of non-locality in physics and in conscious mind.
Incredibly inspiring. Again, Dr. Greer, I'm very, very grateful for all the information that you're sharing with us. Truly inspiring. Could you tell our listeners, we're coming to the end of our presentation here today with you, and again, gratitude for all the work you're doing. Is there a message that you have for our listeners and for humanities as such at the end?
Oh, definitely. I think that there's a beautiful connection with the history of France and the United States. And when were reached out by the senior folks in the French Ministry of Defense on this, I have to say I cried when I read the letter they wrote to me, because it was so beautiful about making a long-term commitment to create peaceful contact with these visitors. It's a beautiful document. And that the people in France who actually supported the founding of the United States, and my mother's family were involved with the founding of the United States, that, the people need to see and get back to their roots of liberty, freedom, and the empowerment of the individual, and the creation of a society that is just and equitable, and that this can be done, and we cannot just give ourselves over to the fascism that has run the world amok over the last 50 or 60 years, and that really this is about the individual learning about this and doing it, and I think we have to begin to throw off the shackles of passivity. With the internet age, everyone's living on their computers and on YouTube vicariously. No one actually goes out and does anything. Everyone's become these sort of, you need to get out with other people and do this. And so I would say let's empower ourselves to transform the planet into the planet of our dreams, just like our four ancestors empowered to create the great republics of France and the United States and create a democratic world. That this is the next phase. The next phase is us becoming interplanetary, and it's an act of our volition. It's an act of our will in coming together as a people to do it, and we have to believe that we can. And odds may seem overwhelming, but remember, the odds that the Americans faced with the British forming the United States were overwhelming, as were those who were trying to establish the French Republic, as were those who wanted to put the first man on the moon. So I think that the human spirit can overcome these limitations, and that's what we have to see ourselves as being if we work together to do it.
Dr. Greer, thank you so much. I really thank you. And I hope that
thank you. I hope to meet you sometime and when we're in Paris.
And I hope you will be able to do something in Paris, and that would be truly my own wish. So, Dr. Greer, I wish you total success in absolutely everything you do. And again, I am hopeful that I will be seeing you sometime in the future. Thank you so much, Dr. Greer.
All righty. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. This is Andreas Mamet with an interview with Dr. Greer, one of the leading experts on the extraterrestrial dimension. Thank you again, Dr. Greer.